Hello and welcome. This will be just a quick video to explain some of the core concepts of Scrum Framework. So Scrum is a lightweight process framework for developing, delivering and sustaining complex products. The framework has been used to help manage complex knowledge work since the early 1990s, with the aim of delivering products of the highest possible value through a creative and productive manner of working. So the image on screen shows the workflow in Scrum. Firstly, items are selected from the product backlog and put into the sprint backlog. In a sprint, which has a maximum time box of 1 month, items from the sprint backlog are implemented. The development team then meet daily. This is called daily scrum with a maximum time box of 15 minutes, and is to check on the progress of the work. Finally, the output at the end of the sprint is a potentially releasable working increment. By adopting evidence-based empirical process control, or empiricism, the implementation of Scrum focuses on transparency, inspection, and adaptation. As a result of making the development techniques and product management transparent, the product, team, and environment can be continuously improved. So the following categories can be used to describe the components of Scrum. Roles, these are the development team, the Scrum Master, and the product owner. Events, such as the sprint, sprint planning, daily scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. Artifacts, such as the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment. And rules, these are what bind together and govern the relationships and interactions between the roles, events, and artifacts. So moving on to the roles in the Scrum framework. The Scrum Team is a self-organizing and cross-functional group made up of a product owner, a Scrum Master, the development team. A self-organizing team chooses internally how best to accomplish their work, instead of being directed by anyone outside of the team. To be sufficiently cross-functional, the team as a whole must have the required competencies to accomplish their selected work, meaning that they would not depend on others external to the team. So the development team, they're a collection of people that are responsible for the implementation of the sprint backlog items, so that at the end of the sprint, they would have produced a working and potentially releasable increment. The recommended size of a development team is 3 to 9 members. It may be easier to remember 6 plus or minus 3. This is small enough for the team to be nimble and large enough to produce a meaningful increment of work within each sprint. It is important to remember that, while certain members may specialize in specific areas, there are no titles or sub-teams for the development team members, and accountability belongs to the team as a whole. Therefore, titles like programmer or tester and sub-areas like architecture, test, operations, etc. should be avoided. The product owner is the value optimizer in the Scrum team, and should aim to maximize the value of the development team's work and the resultant product. The product owner is also responsible for the product backlog and should work to ensure that product backlog items are clearly expressed and transparent. They should be suitably ordered. This means by potentially priority, by understanding, or by the readiness to address by the team. The Scrum Master is a servant leader for the Scrum team, promoting and supporting the implementation of Scrum and working to ensure the team understands the framework. Examples of how the Scrum Master serves the development team are by coaching them in the framework, self-organization, and cross-functionality, facilitating Scrum events, removing impediments, and helping them to create high-value products. Examples of how the Scrum Master serves the product owner are by helping the Scrum team understand the goals, scope, product domain, and the importance of clear product backlog items, and by facilitating Scrum events. The Scrum Master serves the organization by helping with the understanding and adoption of the Scrum framework, driving changes to increase productivity within the organization, and collaborating with other Scrum Masters to make Scrum more effective within the organization. Several time-boxed events must be carried out when following Scrum. Failing to carry out any event is a failure to adhere fully to Scrum. The sprint itself is an event, time-boxed to a maximum of 1 month. It is a container for all the other events. Within the sprint, there are the following Scrum events: sprint planning, daily scrums, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. Each sprint has the following: a clear sprint goal, stating what is to be built, a plan for how the sprint goal will be accomplished, an understanding of the work items to be done, and a potentially releasable increment at the end. It is crucial during the sprint that no changes are made that would endanger the sprint goal, and that the quality goals do not decrease. However, the development team and the product owner may renegotiate the scope of work within the sprint as more is learned. Sprint planning is time boxed to a maximum of 8 hours for a 1 month sprint, and usually shorter for shorter sprints. A guide may be used for 2 hours for each week in a sprint. The event is intended to produce a sprint backlog, which is the result of determining the following: what can be done in this sprint and delivered in the resulting increment. How can this chosen work be done? From this, the Scrum team can decide upon a sprint goal that will help to guide the development team and keep them on track to deliver the intended increment at the end. From the product backlog, the development team selects items for the sprint with help from the product owner, who discusses the objective and provides clarity to the product backlog items. The items are broken down to determine what work must be done to fulfill the definition of done. With work now known, the team then plans an approach for how to complete the work and build the resulting increment. The daily scrum is time boxed to a maximum of 15 minutes and is intended to inspect the work implemented since the last daily scrum and forecast the work to be done until the next one. It is a key inspect and adapt meeting because it can improve communications, identify impediments, speed up decision making, and improve the team's knowledge and understanding. It is an ideal opportunity to inspect progress towards completing the sprint goal and the work in the sprint backlog, a measurement that lets the team know if it needs to adapt or replan the sprint's work. At the end of a sprint review is held for the Scrum team and stakeholders to inspect the increment produced and, if necessary, adapt the product backlog. Based on the increment inspection and any changes to the product backlog, the attendees collaborate on what can be done next to optimize value. The sprint review has a time box of 4 hours maximum for a 1 month sprint and usually less for shorter sprints. A guide may be 1 hour for each week in the sprint. The sprint retrospective is an opportunity for the Scrum team to inspect itself and the last sprint and create a plan for improvements that can be carried out in the next sprint. Typically, when inspecting the previous sprint, the team will consider people, relationships, process, and tools. The team can use the sprint retrospective to determine what went well, along with any potential improvements, and create a plan for how those improvements could be implemented going forward. The time box for a sprint retrospective is a maximum of 3 hours for a 1 month sprint, and usually less for shorter sprints. A guide may be to use 45 minutes for each week in the sprint. Moving on to artifacts in the Scrum Framework. The product backlog is an ordered collection of all known work to be done for the product. It is dynamic and never complete, constantly changing to keep the product appropriate, competitive, and useful. The more a product is developed and used, and feedback is provided, the backlog becomes better defined, including product features, enhancements, and fixes. The product owner is responsible for the product backlog management, with the development team responsible for all estimates of the work. The sprint backlog is a collection of the work selected from the product backlog, along with a plan for how the work will be completed and the sprint goal accomplished. All work required to accomplish the sprint goal should be in the sprint backlog and can be added as new work is discovered. Work deemed unnecessary can be removed. There should also be at least one improvement identified in the previous sprint retrospective in the sprint backlog, so that the team is continuously improving. The development team is responsible for the sprint backlog and measured regularly at the daily scrum. This is to determine progress through the selected work and towards the sprint goal. The increment at the end of a sprint is the sum of all the work completed from the product backlog in the sprint and the increments of all previous sprints. The increment must be potentially releasable and done with respect to the definition of done. It is the product owner's decision whether the increment is released at each sprint. When discussing the Scrum Framework, the 5 values and 3 pillars are often referenced. So empirical process control, or empiricism, has 3 core concepts. These are the 3 pillars of Scrum. Firstly, transparency, using common language and shared standards. Inspection of Scrum artifacts and progress towards a sprint goal. And adaptation, with improvements and adjustments to minimize deviations. To support these 3 values, or pillars, Scrum emphasizes the following values to be embodied by each Scrum team. Commitment to achieving the goals of the Scrum team. Courage to do what is right and to work on tough problems. Focus on the sprint's work and the goals of the Scrum team. Openness about challenges of the work. And respect, to respect each other as capable and independent members of the Scrum team. Thank you for listening. In the description I'll add a link to the content for this video, as well as a link to the official Scrum guide.